Hello, welcome to another talk. This particular talk today is about a pretty contentious subject. It's been going on in Great Britain, where I live. If you haven't noticed, I have a British accent. So this talk is about knife crime and gang culture and everything that surrounds it. And you can probably hear in the background I've put a bit of trap music on, instrumental stuff, as a sort of backdrop for this conversation, because these are the type of beats that I'm associating this talk with, funny enough. I'll get to that now. So yes, we have knife crime in the UK. It's at a level which is unprecedented, really. It's pretty continuous, let's say that. All the time we have the feral youth of the UK, young boys, kids, gangs, all carrying knives, and they are basically stabbing each other. And a lot of people are sort of curious. They're like, why? Why are these kids stabbing each other? Why do they have this nefarious mindset? What is this insidious undertone that has been propagated all over the UK? Why is this violence happening? Why are these little gangs forming? Well, I think that part of this is life imitates art. You're like, what do you mean by that? Well, if you look at the people who are committing the crimes, if you look at the violence and you analyse it, you have a certain demographic. You have a certain stereotype of a person. The person dresses the same. They have a certain language, they use certain semantics and vernacular, which is associated with street language or urban language. They have a certain attitude. They obviously dress a certain way. Pretty much it's homogenized how they dress. The attire that they wear is all very similar. But if you take the way these people speak, and you take how they dress, and you take their attitude, you can directly connect it to music, and a particular music, a UK form of rap or hip-hop called grime or drill music. I guarantee if the police did a stop and search on 99% of these people who do knife crimes, if they did a stop and search and they could pull an iPod out from one of these criminals, I guarantee he, because it's predominantly a male, would be listening to grime or drill music. There is a correlation, and I can't believe people have been so credulous and naive to miss this. There are some people who have noticed it, but there is a general apathy in Britain when it comes to what are some of the influences which are getting into the psyche of these particular individuals to make them go and stab people. It's life imitating art. And the art which is being imitated and the art which is inspiring these kids is a gangsterized form of hip-hop, rap music, drill, grime, whatever you want to call it. The music has a certain vernacular. The way they speak on record is the way they speak in the streets. What they talk about doing on the record is what they do on the streets. It's a complete reflection of the culture. And people will say, well, I don't think that's really happening. But it's already happened. It already happened in America in the 90s with gangster rap or gangster hip hop. This stuff was born out from the Bloods and the Crips, which is in South Central Los Angeles. And the Bloods and the Crips started to make their own music called gangster rap. Once gangster rap was created, it started to be disseminated all over America. Crime went up. People started to simulate the actions of the records. They started to simulate the vernacular and the semantics of the gangster. They started to do gang signs. And I'm not talking about black people simulating it. I'm talking about white middle-class American kids simulating it in colleges, in universities, and just generally from pretty well-to-do backgrounds. What happens is the culture starts to assimilate itself, the music culture starts to assimilate itself and spread. Then it starts to affect the dialect, the rhetoric of how people talk. If you meet people in America, they will use the language of rap records. They will do gang signs. Look at the fist bump. Where does the fist bump come from? And the handshake. It all comes from gangster culture, gangster music, gangster rap. I'm talking about America now. If you look at all the handshakes, if you look at the way the certain language that people use, which is broken English, it's called Ebonics, which is a fragmented form of broken English, basically. A lot of people speak in Ebonics, and that has been proliferated around America for a long time now. We're talking 20 to 30 years. What has happened is that same phenomenon has now spread over to the UK, where the gangster music of the UK has now assimilated itself into British culture. We're talking about towns, cities, and even rural areas. So when you go to parts of the UK now, you go to a small village, you go to a small town, you will meet kids who will be speaking in Ebonics, broken English, street language, urban vernacular. They have appropriated the urban dialect and the semantics of grime and drill music, and they now talk like that. It becomes completely homogenized. But they don't only talk like that, they will dress like that. And they won't only dress like that, but they will walk like that. And they won't only walk like that, but they will behave like some of the characters who are on the records. It affects the psychology of these individuals. It affects the psyche. It's insidious, and it crawls into the mentality of a generation of young people, and it starts to affect their behaviour, just like it did in America in the 1990s. It was the same thing, but it's taken a different form. It's just in a different country. Drill and grime are gangsterized forms of music. I would argue that most of the music which comes from these artists is toxic. It is demonic. It has a negative effect on the psyche of a young male because it glorifies violence. If you listen to the records, it will talk about using weapons, sharp objects, knives for hurting another person. They use different vernacular to describe what a knife is. A shank, I think, is one of them. They've got different, is it a shank? I don't know. But they've got different Ebonic language types which they will use to describe a knife. And They talk about violence on other gangs. They talk about using different forms of weaponry, in particular a knife, to hurt rival gangs. So what we have set up is we have life imitating art. Someone buys the record, someone watches the music video. They start to dress like these people, number one. Number two, they start to talk like these people. Number three, they adopt the mentality of these people, which generally involves hypermasculine toxic traits like wanting to kill another person. Now this is a huge deal in England because I've seen it slowly unravel over the years. I remember I started to really notice it in 2010, where I did say to people, I remember saying, I said, this music culture is going to spread. I said it is toxic, and I said it will start to affect the minds of the youth of Great Britain. We now have our own feral youth, our gangsterized youth. I've seen them walking around where I live. I see them dressed in black, hoodies, face masks. You know, the face is always covered. You can hear them talking as they walk past in their broken English, using urban street vernacular. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they will be inspired or influenced to go and cause harm. That is what is happening in the UK. The problem with me saying this is a lot of people will say I'm vilifying a music culture, because people are too afraid to criticise a certain music culture, especially UK hip-hop, grime or drill, whatever way you want to call it. They will not criticise it. They will not be scathing towards it because they fear the repercussions, because they know it's violent. They know it's affiliated with gang culture, so they won't criticise it. They'll criticise some indie band instead, you know, or some folk singer, or Ed Sheeran. People will not dare criticise this form of music. They will not call it out for what it is, because they have fear of some sort of retribution, some sort of attack, that they will be victims themselves. But this is glaringly obvious to me. I mean, I can't believe how vacuous and asinine people are to not see this. It's been going on for a long time. I'm not saying it's the whole problem. I'm not saying, oh yeah, people are just stabbing each other because it's a music culture. But I'm saying it's part of the problem. It is part of the problem. It exists. And if you cannot see that, there is a naivety there. There is a blindness. We need to not be so credulous when it comes to this subject matter. No one is impervious to it, because it's everywhere now. It's in every nook and cranny. So don't think because you're middle class and you live in a rainbow gated community that you will be impervious and sheltered from these types of characters, because it is spreading. The music culture has had a huge influence of the youth of the UK. And we're talking about working class and middle class. There was a stabbing recently in London, I think it was, where a middle class kid was stabbed. This is an interesting one. He was stabbed, a middle class kid was stabbed in a park where he went to meet a girl. He was a middle class kid, right? And the kids that stabbed him were all, as I said, dressed in hoodies. They had the urban vernacular, street semantics, and they had all the attire that I'm talking about. They stabbed him and they killed him. They were middle class. The police found the voice recordings of these kids from WhatsApp messages back and forth to each other. They were from a middle class background, these kids. but they were talking like they were from the streets. They were talking like they were on a drill record. Their whole language, their whole psychology has been hijacked and co-opted by a form of music. So they went and stabbed this kid. I think they went to school with the kid or something. They knew him, but he was murdered. So I think people need to wake up. People are very apathetic when it comes to this. And I find that deeply disturbing because there's a lack of vision and understanding of popular culture. There's a lack of understanding of how life imitates art. We've seen life imitate art many times before with gangster rap from the 90s and late 80s, from punk music to goth music to the mods and rockers. There's a whole litany of it through culture. You just have to search through previous music genres and styles and look how the music influences the culture, not the other way round. How the music influences the culture. Punk music did it. Punk music managed to get people to dress a certain way. Punk music managed to get people to talk a certain way. Punk music managed to get people to behave a certain way. It's obvious and it's glaring. And people need to wake up because they are not doing anything about it. The record labels are making all the money from it, just like they did in the 90s in America. They put the parental advisor sticker on the record, which means there's going to be swearing and violence probably on there. But the multinational corporations, they are the ones who are making money from it. They're making money from violence. They're making money from the dissemination of criminality. The dissemination of criminality on a record. It's insane. And this insidious undertone of knife crime has been growing and growing and growing. Now we have a whole plethora of deaths. It's constant. The UK is falling to pieces because of it. Because of the mentality of the people, the unconsciousness of the people. Because there was an author called Thomas Sowell, I think his name was, and he did a lot of talks about Ebonics, broken English. And it's interesting with these people because he says part of the decline of culture is language. You break language down, you fragment language. You get people speaking in Ebonics. It disempowers them. It fragments their ability to be able to communicate. They can't express themselves. And then you get this dichotomy, you get this schism, because people can't communicate with each other. It creates separation. And Thomas Sowell spoke very much about the Ebonics with black culture in America. He said it was part of the decline of black America was the injection of urban vernacular, because it disempowered black people. It made people vulnerable. It made them malleable and pliable and susceptible to control. It made them alienate themselves. It made them ostracize themselves. That's exactly what is happening with the feral youth in England. They are alienating themselves. They are separating themselves. There is a schism between them and the rest of society. The rest of society talk normal English, relatively, depending where you're from, whereas these kids have their own dialect, their own language, their own psychology. I can talk more on this subject, and I will, but I think I've given a good overview of my opinions on this subject, and I will dive deeper into this because I'm living in England and I have to deal with this thing, which is this monster that I think is getting bigger and bigger. So I will talk about it more, but I hope this helps, and I look forward to doing another talk soon. Okay, goodbye.